welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston. If this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, your playing, and your production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, please hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we're taking a look at the Tall Bird Plus by Benson Amps. Before we get into anything else, massive thank you to my friend John over at Signal Path for playing lap steel on that intro. His channel links are down below. If you do not already subscribe to him, go check him out. Give him a follow. He is well worth your time. His channel is excellent. Those of you with a refined enough palate to appreciate the germanium boost will know that I am a pretty big Benson fan and have been for quite a while. I have been using their pedals since the preamp pedal came out. I bought a Vinny 1 watt back in like 2017, 2018, something like that. And since its arrival into my life, into my studio, a little over a year ago, the Monarch Plus has basically been the daily driver amplifier for me. It is in part and in whole one of the best amps I've ever used. And I say in part as well because it's not just the amp, but it has a really great sounding single knob spring reverb. And so last year when Benson announced the Surf's Up, that limited edition tube driven spring reverb and tremolo, I was really enticed and really bummed when they all sold out. Imagine my surprise and my joy when the Tall Bird Plus came out a couple of weeks ago. Because this is not just a recreation of something old. This is not just a relabeling of the Surf's Up. This is in many ways an entirely new endeavor from Chris and the folks over at Benson to take a fresh look at the analog spring reverb tank and the tube-driven optical tremolo. So let's get into what this thing is and the ways in which it takes a kind of fresh look at some very classic combinations. First things first, you have the spring reverb in this thing. There are more controls to this spring reverb than I am used to seeing on a real spring. This has separate wet and dry controls, which is very useful for being able to use this as a full wet only reamping or wet dry or parallel mixing piece of hardware, but also because this is an all tube device driven by an EL84 and 312AX7s, you can use the dry control, allowing you to either use this to gain up to hit your amp harder or lean back on your dry volume, allowing that spring reverb to hit your amplifier with better clarity and headroom. The reverb itself has obviously a wet control, but also a dwell control and a size knob. The dwell is going to be basically what you expect it to be. It's effectively the input gain into the spring tank. At low settings, you have shorter decays, softer reverb, less splash and drip. As you kind of turn that up, you get louder, gainier spring reverb, more splash, more texture, and of course, longer trails. The really interesting aspect to the reverb in this thing is that size control. It's effectively a high pass filter where at fully clockwise or maximum, you are doing no low end filtering at all, giving you access to this giant full frequency reverb tail that has so much kind of character and body to it that when you really push that dwell in tandem, it almost pushes you more into really reflective room territory as far as reverb goes. You can almost get like a splashy hall sound out of this spring tank. But as you kind of dial that knob counterclockwise, you start to cut low end out, consequently making your reverb sound brighter, but also making it sound a little bit more controlled, tapered off, more traditionally splashy and springy. And those two controls in tandem with one another really give you access to a wide variety of colors and textures for spring reverb, as illustrated by that intro track where you heard it on guitars, you heard it on lap steel, and you heard it on acoustic instruments. And on the tremolo side, you have a really interesting kind of approach here. This is a tube-driven optical photocell tremolo that is switchable between traditional kind of classic amplitude tremolo or a harmonic tremolo that gives you access to incredibly lush, soupy, syrupy kind of, classic harmonic trem, in my opinion, on steroids. And there's a reason that there's a little bit more vibe and extremeness to it, in my opinion, which is that the waveform shape in this device is a little bit non-traditional for a tremolo unit. I think often when you see an analog trem like this that only is going to have like one available waveform, you expect it to be more of a square or more of a sine or more of a triangle or one of these kind of expected traditional sounds. There's an interesting shape to the waveform here that feels like a very interesting kind of blend between a square wave and a sine wave that almost, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but it feels like if you took a ramping trem up and a ramping trem down and kind of squished them together. I get that that's technically just a triangle, but there is a curvature to the top where it flattens out that really gives it a very specific texture that feels very all its own for this device. And to that end, this thing also has the ability to go incredibly shallow or incredibly deep with the depth, but also, as you will hear in our sound samples, it has the ability to go glacially slow, like slower than you expect an analog trem like this to be able to go, in a way that's really beautiful and inspiring for kind of slow-moving sound design ideas. Also, it can get fast and skittery and choppy, and that waveform lends itself really effectively to very rhythmic and aggressive tremolo sounds. And of course, because this thing is an amp top device and has two different effects in it, you of course have your Tall Bird Plus foot switch. It's a TRS foot switch that has a reverb channel and a tremolo channel. Simple, easy, straight to the point. You've been hearing this thing on the channel quite a bit recently if you've been listening. If you've heard basically any tremolo on here in the last month or so, it's been the Tall Bird Plus. If you go and listen to the sine wave amps video I put out just I think 2 videos back or so on this channel, all the tremolo is from this device. Some of the spring reverb is from this device as well. And beyond that, we use this thing like crazy on acoustic instruments on that intro, because I was using one of those Fender Acoustasonic acoustic guitars. I think they sound really cool, but I also think that when you're running them direct in, they can come across as somewhat sterile and kind of out of place in the world of a mix, because you don't expect to hear an acoustic instrument not mic'd up. And by taking that 1/4-inch cable and running that guitar through the Tall Bird Plus and into our interface, it allows us to place those instruments inside of a reverberant area that gives them life and character and a sense of grounding in a mix. But also, the trails on this thing can get so intense, and the ability to take that dry signal down or out allows you to also take that spring reverb and that tremolo and reimagine it as sound design vibes. And it has the headroom to be able to do that in your DAW. I had John Bleeker from Signal Path send me a bunch of lap steel for that song, and we just reamped all that stuff through the Tall Bird Plus into a Soyuz Lakeside DI preamp, and the results were phenomenal. And I was able to send all that line level lap steel through this without distortion or headroom issues or anything like that, with very minimal reamp volume tweaking. So I think it's time for us to get into our sound samples. We're going to start off with a Fender Telecaster going into the Tall Bird Plus to take a look at that spring reverb. Let's give it a listen. So as always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we are working in. I am playing my Fender 52 reissue Telecaster. We are running into the 29 pedals Una input buffer and line driver. We're going to be using the Cali 76 FET compressor and potentially the Brothers AM by Chase Bliss. We're running into the Tall Bird Plus and into my Benson Monarch Plus amplifier mic'd up with an AEA N22 ribbon. We're recording through a Warm Audio WA273 preamp, and this is what our dry tone sounds like. Let's go ahead and start things off by taking a look at just the straight up dry control here, which is going to operate both as a kind of boost for hitting your amplifier harder, as well as being able to cut to use the reverb section of the Tall Bird Plus as a wet send only. At 0, we have our unity. But of course, you have the ability to drive the output of this harder to hit your amp harder. So we'll touch on the kind of cut side of this as we move along, but let's go ahead and bring in the spring reverb section of the Tall Bird right now using our foot switch. So let's go ahead and run through some of these controls. You have your dwell, your mix, and your size. The dwell is going to be how hard you are driving the spring reverb. So at minimum settings, you're going to get a lot less drip and a lot less decay. And as you can hear, you're starting to get more splash, but also a lot more kind of length, a lot more of a trail out of that reverb. Let's go ahead and kill dry our dry signal as we run through this really quick, and then we'll bring it back in to kind of show some real world examples of those different decay settings. obviously you have a lot of versatility across the kind of wet-dry combination set up on two different pots, as well as that kind of drive control and that dwell. However, you also have this extra control over here, a third parameter for the spring reverb in the Tall Bird, and this is your size control, which is basically a low-pass filter where at 0, it carves out a lot of the low end, giving you kind of a classic tight spring sound as heard like this. But at the far end, you can totally take out that low pass filter, giving you massive cavernous low end that almost darkens the tone by comparison, as well as giving you much more of a kind of borderline cavern or hall style sound. I'm a very big fan of using that, especially after a delay, because when you really start to kind of crank that size up to this kind of larger half of that low end response, you get a somewhat smoother, mellower tone out of the reverb, especially if you kind of bring it down a bit, but like let it linger for a while. Sounds really good after a delay. So let's pull in the Chase Bliss Thermae and give it a listen. Okay, let's switch things out for my Gibson Les Paul and take a look at that tremolo, both classic and harmonic. We're going to spend a lot of time in the neck position on these sound samples, and as I was listening back and editing this video, I had headphones on, and I would highly recommend you do the same. That harmonic trem gets really mesmerizing when you really just kind of like let it envelop you. It sounds amazing. Let's give it a listen. And finally, let's give a listen to some acoustic instruments through the Tall Bird Plus. We're going to go ahead and just pull up the soloed acoustic guitars from that song, mixed in everything. We're not going to like take it down to like dry stems, because even though I was live tracking all those acoustics through the Tall Bird Plus, I was effectively doing it with the purpose of kind of going after a sound design kind of vibe. I was looking for the Tall Bird Plus as a studio accentuator and contextualizer and color device for those acoustics. And so hearing them in the kind of full produced quality of them isolated in the mix, I think will kind of drive home the point I'm making about using this not just into your guitar amp, but in other contexts as well. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a comment down below letting me know, or hit that like button. It takes a quarter of a second. It helps the channel grow. Thank you again for watching. I will catch you in the next one.